Look for the bare necessities, the simple bare necessities. Forget about your worries and your strife. I mean the bare necessities of Mother Nature's recipes. Bring the bare necessities.
Welcome back to another episode of John's Bear, the traveling bear through Sauk Prairie, raising awareness and funds for the PAC event, and where we try to feed people around the world who are starving. And to this episode, we get a beautiful privilege. I got to travel back to my hometown and spend some time a weekend with my parents, and some extra special time reminiscing with my mom. This bear that we've been traveling and following has a beautiful beginning, a beautiful story of its beginnings that began with my mother. So we got to go back to the farm, and you guys get a special treat to meet my mom and hear the story that about her growing up, and as well as the story that she wrote about a bear that goes on many adventures. And so as we travel back, I hope you enjoy, sit back and enjoy this next episode featuring my mother.
I used to collect bears. I have a lot of them. I only have a few special ones that I keep here now, all the time. Those that I didn't keep, I donated to like the sheriff's department to give to children if there were accidents or fires or emergencies where they needed a cuddly to hold on to. But they're all kind of special. These are cuddly. This one here actually was given to me to announce the expected birth of my first grandson. And I wrote a story about a bear, and I used this one as a model for a picture of the bear that I drew for the story. Well, our family was lived in the country on a farm. The few farm animals we had were chickens, geese. Somebody had a couple rabbits at one point, and some pigeons, cats, a dog, and land. My dad worked land, plowed, planted crops, but he worked off the farm. And our family did not have running water until 1968, the year I got married and moved out of the house. Wow. I know. It's like, but we had a pump outside. We would pump the water for drinking and for laundry and for hand cleaning and washing. We would heat the water in the wash machine with an electric heater. Plugged in and put that in water, and it heated it. And so the whole ring wash, you had to crank and crank, make sure your fingers were out of the way or they'd get cranked in there. And everything got hung up outside on the line. In the winter, we did it as well. But in the winter, the clothes froze out there. I remember Dad's long underwear, they would be frozen, and we'd bring them all into the house, and there they would
Froze dried
and drip on newspaper on the floor. Right.
What do you have three sisters?
And three sisters.
What do you remember as children growing up? How did you guys play together? What did you do for fun?
In the summertime, we'd pump water in a little tub, set it outside in the sun, and then in the afternoon we would go swimming, and there was step in and step out. That was basically it. Sit down in it maybe, and that was about it. It was one thing I used to do when I was little. I was bound and determined to build a car. And so several summers in a row, I had this box that I found, cardboard box, and I found something that would work as a steering wheel. It actually wasn't a wheel, it was a belt. I don't know how that was going to steer my car, but I don't know. And I found 3 wheels. I spent a good part of the summer looking all over the farm for a 4th wheel. Then the next summer came around, the same scenario. Several years in a row, I kept looking for that 4th wheel. And after a while, I thought, I guess I could have had 1 in the front, 2 in the back, but it never worked. I go fishing out in our driveway after a rain. I had a stick with a string on it.
Catch any fish?
And I put it in a puddle of water. I guess imaginary ones,
Yeah.
nothing edible. Yeah. We helped a lot at home. Did some canning. I remember that. Peaches, I remember doing that. I was thinking about that just recently. I remember working with my mom doing peaches. My job was to peel the peelings off after the peach was cooked a little bit. But that's all I remember about it. We walked down to a swamp one spring, and we had this big dog called Duke. And as far as sisters were walking to the swamp, we were going to walk in a little ways in, and my older sister was ahead of us, and all of a sudden she saw something and she screamed, "A bear! A bear!" So my two older sisters turned around and raced out, trampled over me, and the bear happened to be our dog. It never was a real bear. But
after you grew up, you got married and continued to live on a farm with your husband and a dad, and phenomenal job raising 6 kids. Do you have any good stories about me growing up? Or
you were a good little boy growing up, full of adventure, always creating something, making something, often an adventure of your own at times. You and your brother Tom often would play together, climbing as high as you can go in the barn, up in the rafters, swinging from ropes, jumping into straw.
I never broke a bone though.
You never broke it. Your brother kept breaking the same ones. How about Cooter?
Oh, Cooter. That's a good story.
When John was really little, I have to tell you this. When John was really little, we were at our pond on the farm, and he was fishing, and we had some food to eat, and he turns around and he says, "Hey, Mom, do you have any marshmallows for roasting?" That was cute. But our family had some big bales of hay alongside a field one year, and they were bringing them home, and in the house walked the boys with this little raccoon. I went, "Oh, where did you get that?" Well, there was a family of raccoons in the bales of hay, and they thought they could keep one. And my husband said, well, he thought, that's not so good. But then he figured it probably wouldn't live very long. But he also pictured all these dead raccoons on the road. So he thought, what the heck? So they brought it home, and I was like, oh, okay. We found an old fish tank with a screen over the top and put it in there. I even was very motherly, and I found a nice pink little blankety rag that I put in for it. And later on, I looked in, and there was all these little black things crawling on the pink rag. I went, oh no, lice. Boys, get in here. Undress and get in the shower now. I sprayed the cage and the coon with Raid insect spray. The coon lived. It was all fine. Eventually put it in a different cage, but eventually the coon grew up, and we didn't see it. We didn't see that raccoon for a while. And then in spring, it was Easter Sunday. We had a tree that had a hole in it, and there was like, what? There's a raccoon looking out of the hole. Well, Cooner is what we called him. But that's Easter morning. On a ladder, John crawled up and looked in the tree, and there was Cooner with her babies.
Yeah.
So she took them someplace, and they were gone. We never saw them anymore after that. But it was a nice little thing. I was so proud of my boys for teaching the coon how to catch birds.
Raise the coon of our own.
Right.
It was a fun pet.
It's a love for animals.
Even our dog learned to enjoy Cooner. By enjoy, we mean chase around the farm.
Right.
Yeah. I have just such fond memories of growing up. Of you have such a love for reading, but also telling stories of your own and writing stories. Was there anything that inspired you to get into that, or how did you just fall in love with stories?
I I like to read. I always like to read, and when I was younger, my two older sisters would always tell me at night before they couldn't fall asleep, so they wanted me to tell them stories. Tell us a story. They'd say, tell us a story. So I had to make up stories on the spot. A couple of them I repeated and repeated over and over again because, I mean, how many stories can you make up when it's time to go to sleep? But I enjoyed doing that. I liked making up stories and just telling.
Well, it's a legacy that is continuing. I love also to tell my boys different stories, and I have some stories that have running characters. And so Josiah just the other day said, "Tell me another Jamie and Charlie story," and they go on many adventures too. But I imagine my love for story and creation is definitely rooted from your love. And one particular story that I know that my siblings and we heard so many times, you would tell it over and over, and you wrote it down, and we'd hear it over and over, and it's called Hug-a-Bug, and it was an inspiration for me when I was deciding with this traveling bear that we were creating, that I wanted to, I had to create a bear of my own, and I inspired by the story of the Hug-a-Bug and the bear that was in this story as I was designing this and creating it. And so I thought it'd be very awesome for everyone to be able to see this story several years ago, as you kept telling this story, and you would then started reading it to our children, your grandchildren. My siblings and I decided that we wanted to put together and get your story printed in a book and have our kids illustrate it. So you were going to be able to have the opportunity to hear from my mom reading the story Hug-a-Bug, which was part of the inspiration behind the bear that we are having today. And this bear could be yours too. It's a way to just have fun and raise some funds. And I thought it'd be neat to get some of the backstory with this episode. And so you can bid on it online. You can put donations, just make a donation in name of the bear. Or at the PAC event that's coming up in October, the bear will be there with a silent auction. You can continue to bid, and the person with the highest bidder will get to go home with the bear and keep it forever. So we will hear from my mom reading Hug-a-Bug.
Hug-a-Bug was a little bear, and he was named that because he loved hugs. And his mom and dad said he was as cute as a bug in a rug. So they called him Hug-a-Bug. Hug-a-Bug was a very active and curious little bear. Just had to see everything. So today I'd like to tell you about the adventures in the woods. One such adventure happened on a beautiful, warm, sunny day. Hug-a-Bug's dad and mom planned to spend the entire day in the woods. There were lots of chores for the bears to do in the woods. They had to collect broken branches for wood that they used to heat their home in the winter. They collected long grasses called canary grass that had to be cut and piled and dried so that it could be used for their mattresses on their beds. And the bears had to find many different kinds of food to collect and store so when winter came they'd have enough good food to eat. That particular morning, the bear family got up really early, ate their breakfast, and started out to their collecting. Dad took his grass cutters and the hatchet for the pieces of wood that he would have to cut and break and take along. They were too long, he had to cut them. And he pulled a very big wooden sled behind him. Mom had a wagon she pulled filled with barrels and pails and put the different kinds of food into them that they were planning to find. Now Hug-a-Bug, it's a picture of Hug-a-Bug holding his wagon. Hug-a-Bug was kind of a small bear who sometimes had a hard time keeping up with his mom and dad, and who sometimes would trip, stumble, or fall down because he was always looking around, trying to see everything and not always watching where he was going. But he never really got hurt from falling. He was just a roly-poly little bear cub. Well, anyhow, Hug-a-Bug pulled a rather small wagon with a roll of string, 2 pails in it for collecting his things. There's a picture someone drew. One of the grandchildren drew that picture. They really had made a good team, all working together down the path they went. First job was to collect the broken tree branches that were on the ground and put them on a pile. Huggabug was so excited. This was fun. He ran through the woods and, oops, oh darn, he tripped over a branch. Well, he picked it up and put it on a pile. When the piles were big enough, Dad had tied them together with some of the string that Huggabug had in his wagon, and they all helped pile the bundles of wood into Dad's sled. The sled was left at the edge of the woods to take home, and they were all through with their collecting. Dad and Mom walked to the side of the woods where the canary grass grew. Mom called, "Huggabug, where are you?" Huggabug said, "I'm coming, Mom." Huggabug was sitting under a big oak tree, just collecting of his own kind of stuff. You see, in that tree was a little squirrel who was dropping acorn nuts down to see if he could get them into Huggabug's pail. But the squirrel kept missing the pail and hitting Huggabug on the head. Huggabug started to giggle because the acorns didn't hurt him. He looked up and said, "Hey, what are you doing?" The squirrel told him he was trying to fill the bucket. Huggabug said to the squirrel, "Never mind, I'll put the acorns in the pail by myself. You keep missing anyhow." He giggled some more and heard his mom call him again. So he said goodbye to the squirrel, took his pail, and ran towards his mom and dad. Here's a little squirrel dropping nuts down onto the Huggabug's pail. When Huggabug got to the place where the canary grass grew, he slowed down a little because, well, even though canary grass collecting is very exciting, it's also dangerous. You see, do any of you know how canary grass grows? Well, it grows very tall. In fact, I've walked through some that got to be about 6 feet tall. Very high. Yep, over my head. So for a little bear like Huggabug, it was way over his head. He could get lost in it. But the path of grass wasn't very big, and he made a lot of noise, so his dad and mom always knew where he was. He wouldn't really get lost. But Huggabug had a different problem. See, his little legs had such a hard time walking through all that grass that, guess what? He fell down a lot. That's just what happened. He ran into the grasses and got his feet all tangled up. Plop, down he went. "Oh boy," he said. You know, he'd been working and running so much since they started that he was a little tired. So he just stayed right down where he fell, and he lay there to rest a little bit. He was digging with his finger in the ground when he found a real neat stone. He thought it was a stone, so he picked it up. It wasn't a stone. It was a little snail in its shell. So Huggabug held it very gently, and the snail peeked his head out of the shell and looked around. Then it started to crawl on Huggabug's hand. Well, that made Huggabug giggle again because it tickled his hand. The snail stopped and said, "What's so funny?" Huggabug told him, "You're tickling my hand. I think you're real neat. Would you like to come home with me in my pail of neat things I'm collecting today? I'll make a nice home for you in some ground near my place." "Oh, sure, I don't mind," said the snail. Huggabug held the snail for a while, and then he put it into the pail with the acorns. Here's a snail. Oh, thought Huggabug, the sun sure was warm and was getting tired. He laid his head on the pile of grass, closed his eyes, and fell asleep. While Dad and Mom were busy cutting canary grass, tying it in bundles and putting it in the sled on top of the piles of wood, all ready to take home later. Now the wood and the grass collecting was finished, so it was food collecting time. The acorns were easy to find because the squirrel had thrown so many acorns down and missing the pail that they were right under the big oak tree. Dad and Mom also picked hickory nuts, hazelnuts, black walnuts, and butternuts. All of the nuts were put into one of Mom's pails. They picked wild cucumbers, rhubarb stalks, the mushrooms that are safe to eat, not the poisonous ones. and asparagus spears that all went into another pail. Excuse me. Before they walked on towards the part of the woods where the berry patches were, Dad and Mom thought they had better wake up Hug-a-Bug. So Dad went to do that. When he got there, he started to laugh out loud. Sitting right on Hug-a-Bug's ear was a big butterfly. Dad's laughing woke Hug-a-Bug, and the butterfly flew away. "What's so funny, Dad?" Hug-a-Bug asked. "Oh, just that you look like a big brown flower with that butterfly on your ear." Here's a butterfly. "Let's go. We've got to pick berries and before it gets too late." "Oh, wow, berry picking." That was Hug-a-Bug's favorite. That was his favorite job. Can you guess why? That's right. He could eat the berries as he picked them. Mom was already picking some wild strawberries when they got there, so Hug-a-Bug started to help and eat before long. His hands and mouth were all red from the strawberries. Black raspberries were next. They tasted good, but the raspberry bushes had thorns, little prickers on them, and Hug-a-Bug kept getting his fur stuck. So he just picked himself a handful and sat down to eat them. While he was eating, he spotted some real pretty flowers nearby, so he picked a nice bouquet for his mom. He put them into another pail to take home and give to her later. Here's some pictures. Hug-a-Bug's mom and dad were over by the blueberry patch and were filling the baskets with the blueberries. When Hug-a-Bug saw them, he started running over to help them. Just then, he saw the butterfly that had been on his ears, so he began to chase it. Maybe he could catch it. Well, he wasn't watching where he was going. Poor Hug-a-Bug. He ran so fast, he tripped over the wagon that had his baskets and pails of food in it, and he landed right in the middle of the blueberry bushes where the biggest, juiciest berries were. Oh, you won't believe, poor Hug-a-Bug. Well, he wasn't hurt except for a few scratches, but he was all blue from the berries. His dad helped him out, and his mom said that they had enough food, so they picked up all they had started, and back home they went. By the time they got home, Hug-a-Bug looked as if he were wearing a pair of blue jeans. The warm sun had dried the blueberry juice onto his fur. He really felt silly. He looked a little silly, too. But when they got home, his mom filled the bathtub with warm soapy water, and Hug-a-Bug went in to wash off. While he was in the tub, Hug-a-Bug was starting to get a little concerned because the water was getting all blue, too. He didn't realize that what was coming off of him was going into the water. He thought he was going to be blue all over. So he quickly got out of the tub, dried off, and was so happy to see he was still the same brown color. Hug-a-Bug got ready for bed, made a little nest in a jar for his nail, gave his mom the flowers he picked, and put the acorns on his dresser just to look at it. Then he smiled and remembered that little squirrel in the tree. It was getting late, so he gave his dad and mom a goodnight kiss and, of course, a great big hug. Hug-a-Bug crawled into bed and was soon sound asleep, dreaming about his next day's adventure. Good night, Hug-a-Bug.
Wherever I wander, wherever I roam, I couldn't be fonder of my big home. The bees are buzzing in the tree to make some honey just for me. You look under the rocks and plants and then take a glance at the fancy ants, then maybe try a few. The bare necessities of life will come to you.